Right, welcome everyone. So it's webinar number 6 of our series, and our topic today is managing finance in times of inflation. So certainly a hot topic, I believe. And when I talk about inflation, it's the general increase in prices and a fall in the purchasing value of our money. Or in short, is actually what we're experiencing right now in the supermarkets. And to be honest, it's something that I've never seen in 45 years in the supermarket, and it can be scary at times. When we look at the statistics, the consumer price index said that we had a peak in the second quarter of 7.3%. It came down just a bit to 7.2% in the last quarter, but it was actually way above expectations. So the expectations are now that the central bank will have to increase the OCR rate again, which means we're probably ending up somewhere at around 5% OCR rate. And why is it important? Because the other day I read an article in The Economist, and it said that more than half of all the mortgages in New Zealand will be due for renewal in 6 to 12 months time. So if you have a loan or credit of $1 million and all of a sudden your interest payments go up from, let's say, $30,000 to $60,000 a year, it's quite a bit of money. And it's actually money that consumers won't have to spend. So that's why it's important for companies to adjust to the situation. We might not have seen the peak yet, and it actually wasn't a real surprise that inflation keeps on creeping up, because when we look at the business price index, or the PPI as it's called in other countries, it has been rising for quite some time. So you can see capital goods prices, or prices that farmers had to pay, they've increased for quite some time. So the rates of change that you see here, they're the annual change. So they've been going up, and slowly but surely it actually shows up here with us consumers. But before I go too deep into the topic, I'd like to get a bit of a feel here for the audience and understand, where's your business at? Are you still experience revenue growth, and actually your gross profit margins are improving, or they're at least stable? Or is revenue growing, but it's actually hard to pass on the cost increases to your customers, so gross profit margins might be decreasing? Or is it almost a bit of a recessionary environment already, where you see revenues declining but gross profit margins are fairly stable? Or is the revenue declining and gross profit margins are going down? And if you don't know, that's okay too. I know there's a couple of more options really, but I try to make it easy. So Corinna, if you can bring up the Zoom poll, and we'll have a quick poll. Just click what's closest to your situation to get a bit of a feel where you're at. Okay, so that's great to see. So we've got a majority here that still has revenue growth, but the majority of you actually say there's revenue growth, but gross profit margins are coming down. So that's a really good insight. So thank you for sharing the information. All right, so let's move on. So why do we actually experience the inflation? In fact, what we have here is the perfect storm of inflation. It all started in 2009 during the global financial crisis, or GFC, when central banks lowered interest rates across the board, just to stimulate the economy, but also to help our governments to bail out the banks. And the interest rate has been low for quite some time. In fact, actually more than 10 years now. And over time, the effect was that we experienced an asset inflation. So you all remember property prices going up, not only here in New Zealand, but all over the world, but also the share market and up to the Bitcoin, everything basically went up and up and up. And this resulted in some sort of overheated economy because the demand was far greater than the supply. And at the same time, we had a lack of competition, especially here in New Zealand, where it's not a super competitive environment. So it was easier for companies to raise their prices. And because of the high demand, raw material prices went up. And now then all of a sudden, we threw the COVID and the corresponding lockdowns into the mix, as well as the war in Russia and Ukraine. And when you wonder why is Russia and Ukraine, why is it an issue for inflation, it's not only because Russia is a major oil exporter and gas exporter, and obviously that caused energy prices to rise, but Russia and Ukraine, they're also the largest exporter in the world for grain and fertilizers. So it has a direct effect on food costs, for example. And at the same time, our people, they're demanding more money, more wages, and we've got the labor shortage because we had immigration was basically on a hold for about 2 years, so we couldn't get any people. So all these factors, they lead to the fact that inflation kept on rising and might be rising for quite some time. And the last issue here on this slide is the deglobalization. So in the past 25 years, really, we had the globalization, and it helped to control costs. So manufacturing, for example, was outsourced to China, and China focused on producing steel, for example. Other countries like Germany, they focused on manufacturing cars, and other countries like in New Zealand, it's around dairy or kiwi fruit or things like that. So each country had a bit of a competitive advantage, but with deglobalization and a bit of protectionism that's actually coming, that would mean that each country starts to produce their own things, and it doesn't really help to control costs. But inflation is not necessarily a bad thing, and because it becomes a lot easier in the future to repay debt, and that's true for both consumers or companies. So it's actually a good thing to sit it out, because if you're able to generate more revenue in the future, it becomes easier to pay back the loans. It also pushes the consumers to purchase your goods or services rather today than tomorrow. Because if prices rise, no point in waiting. And finally, it forces us to rethink our business models, which is a good thing too, because change is helpful. I want to do a quick quiz, and type the answer in the chat, and because I'm seeing here some parallels actually to the oil crisis in 1973, 1974. And during that time, we saw a barrel of oil increasing from $2.9 to $11.65. So it's almost 400%. And meanwhile, the price in Europe for the gas future has increased by quite a bit. And it was 41 euros in November 2021. And what do you think was the price for the gas future in late August in Europe? Was it 120, 250, 350, or 425 euros? So type it in the chat. What do you think? Jackie saying C, 350, 250, 120, 425. Yeah. So we don't have a clear favorite here, but the right answer was actually $350 euros. So that was the peak in August 22. The price has come down ever since, but still it's an increase of almost 800%. And why is it important? Because in Europe, for example, people will have to pay about 3 times the amount for gas and electricity of what they used to pay. And again, if you're selling products into Europe, that's something to consider, because, for example, a kiwi fruit in Europe in a supermarket costs 99 euro cents. So, and if you have all these extra costs, a kiwi fruit all of a sudden might become a luxury item. Next question. The inflation rate in Turkey has increased from 19.2% last year to 35%, 50%, 65%, or even 80%. So again, type it in the chat. What do you think? Where's Turkey's inflation rate? So we've got 50, 65, 50, 65, 35. Some people even say 80. So let's have a look where we actually at. We're at 80%. And the reason why I included that example is because it's a bit of a special situation. They have a pretty powerful president, Erdogan, over there, and he thinks he actually wants to keep on stimulating the economy and has a strong influence on their central bank and telling them basically they need to lower the interest rates despite the inflation. The effect is it went up from 19 to 80%. And the final question in our quiz is a US dollar in the 1950s is now worth, is it 5 cents, 12 cents, 19 cents, or 27 cents? What do you think? Again, type it in the chat. Yeah, 5 cents, 12 cents, 5 cents, 12 cents. Darren is optimistic. It's at least worth 19 cents. Let's have a look. It's actually 12 cents. So that's something to be aware of. So although this has been a period of 60 or 70 years, but it was a period, especially in the last 20 to 25 years, with a fairly low inflation. So when we think about things like retirement and we have a high inflation, all of a sudden the picture changes completely. So, and finally, to end of the quiz here, in Zimbabwe, a loaf of bread cost 1.6 trillion Zimbabwe dollars in 2008. And by the way, Zimbabwe is still one of the countries that experiences higher inflation of more than 500%. So what can we do about it? That's the big question here. And it really depends what your strategic game is. So when you work with us, you remember we had this discussion about generic strategy. So choosing your game. And it's really understanding where we're at and where we're really good at. For those of you who are not aware or not familiar with this concept, I'll explain it to you in a second. The important thing is during inflation, we can leverage this competitive advantage and actually double down. So let's have a quick look at operational excellence. So what it basically means is it's around automation, it's improving the efficiency, it's lean management, it's producing volume, it's product standardization. So it's companies, if you think of McDonald's, for example, everything there is standardized. A Big Mac is a Big Mac is a Big Mac, doesn't matter where you're at. If this is your game, if you understand how to keep costs down, you have a strategic advantage compared to your competitors because you understand the game, you know how to automate, you know where the efficiencies are. So keep on doing that because this improves your cost advantage compared to to your peers. The second one is customer intimacy, where you build really strong relationships. You have bespoke solutions, you've got a strong CRM, you know how to make the customer happy. There's a strong component of customer service or customer experience, and you're really clear around your target market customer. Now, if your customer is super happy with you and they continue to be happy, do you think that they would change or jump ships just for 5% increase in cost? Probably not. So making sure to really keep this customer happy, to invest in the customer experience and continue on the journey with them. That is certainly one of the strategies. And thirdly, the product leadership means your game is around innovation, R&D, making sure there's a short time to market, you've got an agile organization, and you're investing in your talent and recruiting of good talent. So think Apple, for example. If I'm keen and I want to continue using my Apple phone, I will probably buy the new Apple phone as well, although the price keeps on going up and up and up. But I'm used to the system and I identify myself with the brand. So this certainly helps and double down on innovation, not cutting costs, but making sure you stay ahead of the game. The problem really starts if you're stuck in the middle and you haven't chosen your game, because then you don't have a competitive advantage that you can leverage. The interesting thing about inflation today is there's actually a strategic opportunities. I mentioned the oil crisis before in the 1970s. Back then you sold your product through a supermarket or some sort of retail store, for example. But back in the days, they had no data whatsoever. And it took months and months and months to get a bit of an idea, is my revenue going up or down? Today, we've got all the right data at a fingertip, and we can make the right decisions. We know if we increase the price, what's the immediate reaction of our customers? Are they not coming back to our website? Are they leaving their cart? So we've got that data and we need to use it. In order to fight inflation, there's 4 basic strategies. Those strategies still apply. They've applied 50 years ago. They still apply, but we can be a bit smarter how we go about it. The issue about all these 4 strategies is that it creates a dilemma. So if we cut our costs, our suppliers might be pretty upset. If we continue to increase our prices, our customers might not be happy. If we try to have productivity and efficiency gains, our team might be upset. An example here is Google. So the CEO of Google just said the other day, I need 20% more productivity out of the team. And it's things like having less people involved in a decision-making process in order to get productivity up and move faster. But all this means change, and obviously it could upset the team. And finally, if we accept that our margins are going to be lower in the future, our shareholders might not be happy. So the question is, what can we do in these different areas? First of all, when it comes to cost cutting, product standardization is one possibility. What I've done with one of my clients the other day is they provide supplements in jars, and we looked at the different sizes of all these jars, and it turns out there's actually quite a few. And there's a possibility that you can just use 2 or 3 different variants, and it has a flow-on effect on packaging and on shipping costs. So this is one example of how you can reduce costs. Recalibrating the product portfolio can mean to either cut out some of the products that sit on your shelf and that just don't sell, but they basically tie up cash in your warehouse. The other thing is, if you have a certain product range, for example, there's a possibility to introduce a premium range or an entry-level range. So it changes the perception of your existing products. So to give you an example, coming back to Apple again, a few years back, they've introduced the SE range, which is a low-cost, affordable product and talks to different target market customer, but it enables younger customers to get on the Apple ladder, so to say, and start using those products. Reducing consumption and waste. Now, I've done some work with a company in the passive fire space, and they use all sorts of material to cover pipes, etc. And that topic came up, and anytime they have a job on site, they order the material, but there wasn't really any sort of clarity how much waste are we producing, and are there processes that could be more efficient? So rather than having all these cutoffs, can we change our processes and can we make it visible at all to understand how much are we actually wasting? Because it's stuff that we order and there could be the possibility to reuse it. Next point, reimagine your products and services. So if we truly put our customer in the center and understand what's their need, what exactly do they want, are there any sort of changes that we can make? Another example of reimagination was BMW, and some of you might have heard about what they've done, that they introduced a subscription for the seat heating. So rather than selling this as a one-off product, you now need a subscription that you can use the heating, especially during winter. And if you think about it, BMW could potentially just say, we'll stop all the customization of our cars. All we do is we provide fully equipped cars. And anytime you need an extra 200 horsepower, you have a subscription. So something like that is possible. So reimagining our products and services. And then there's something like preferred vendor program, just going through that with one of my customers, where we do a complete review of the existing suppliers, who actually qualifies with certain criteria. Can we bundle some of the suppliers and just channel it to one or two different suppliers and save some money because the volume goes up. So all these are examples for cost cutting. Secondly, and the obvious one is to increase prices, but it's obviously not an easy one, and it's hard to communicate to our customer that we're increasing the prices. So there's different options that we have. A variable pricing mechanism is a good example, obviously, are the airlines and Uber. So, you know, it changes by the day, it changes by the minute, actually. Whatever the cost is, it depends on the demand. Another example is Tesla is currently testing a variable insurance premium based on your driving behavior. So these are all new things of what we can do in order to adjust it to the actual demand. By opt-in, opt-out, I mean examples like hotels, and they're introducing different fares for either full service, or if you say, I actually don't need the cleaning service every day, you can opt out of cleaning and your prices drops. Quality or quantity changes, yes, it's obvious too. With quality, what could be an option here is to say, if we have different features in one product. So I come back to my supplement client, where we say we have got a list of 20 different supplements in there. We could potentially take 2 or 3 of these ingredients out, and actually the perception of our customers wouldn't change because the important ones are still in there. But on the other hand, it could also be true that we add a few ingredients at a fairly low cost. So the opposite holds true as well, where we can improve the quality and have less cost involved. Rebundling the offer, that's when you think of the telcos. So buying a new iPhone, you usually need another plan, and the plan changes, and you buy your internet and you buy your landline and you have your mobile phone contract and you get a new phone. So all of that makes it a bit more transparent actually for the customer, and to understand how much am I paying for each service. So this can be a strategy, but the opposite can also be a strategy to unbundle any sort of services that you might have and you just pay per product. But the idea behind it is to steer the customers to the profitable products. And finally, replacing your pricing model, the product as a service. The obvious examples are the big software companies like Microsoft or Adobe, and they've introduced, instead of a one-off fee, a recurring SaaS model. And the interesting fact is that ever since they've done it, yes, initially they had a hit in revenue and revenue was going down, but in the long term, it was highly profitable and their market valuations have gone up tenfold. So this can be a price per unit, it can be a price per user, it can be a price per month, but it's something where the customer actually really understands what's the value behind it. So it makes it easier to understand, is the price fair or not? The third part, productivity and efficiency gains. So automation is obviously, that's one thing. There's solutions for intelligent document processing. So rather than being really busy, if you're in a supermarket and you need to update your website and input all the data and make sure everything's is timely and correct, that takes up a lot of time. If that process can be automated, people can spend more time with actually analyzing the data. Secondly, eliminating work. So there's a concept of zero-based design, which basically means if we start this company again from scratch today, how would we organize work? What sort of roles do we need? Because oftentimes we've got a certain legacy, but this process makes the legacy visible and lets us decide where's some cost-saving potential here. So it's really about scrutinizing what sort of activities are performed and how are they performed, and then start from scratch. A third activity is to understand high and low value tasks. I've recently done this exercise with one of my clients, and surprise, surprise, the list of low value tasks of the CEO is actually longer than the high value tasks. And if you wonder what's a high and what's a low value task, just look at your hourly rate. And if you're the business owner, your hourly rate is basically how much do you pay yourself per year and how much do you work? That's your hourly rate. And then if you look at the tasks of what you're actually performing all day long, you kind of get a feel for it that there's certain things that you shouldn't do. And outsourcing can be an answer, delegating can be an answer, or even eliminating the work can be an answer as well. Staff retention. I actually want to refer to the webinar that my colleague Chris Bunce gave a couple of months back. He talked about many possibilities how we can retain our staff. Important thing and takeaway here is if we lose a key staff member, it takes months and months to get the productivity back because we need to train this person. And also the opposite is true. If we hire the wrong person and we can't get this person up to speed, it takes some time to get rid of these people again. And it's also a drop in productivity. So really making sure you hire the right people and keep the people is crucial. And finally, it's just getting the mix right between what should we make in-house and what should we buy, and understanding what sits at the core of your products and services. Where do you need to make sure this is something you need to control, and it's your competitive advantage. Everything around it can basically be outsourced. The final one is the margin adjustment. With the margin adjustment, we really need to understand how much money are we making per product or service, but also how much money are we making per customer? Because, for example, in our case as consultants, there's some customers who just need more time and some customers are really easygoing. If we charge the same amount of money to everyone, yes, it's a strategy, but it might not be fair and it might not be the most profitable one. So really identifying the leaky buckets here. So these are some of the strategies that we can do. So what are the mistakes? The mistakes is, and that was a strategy of the past, we just cut costs across the board and we reduce budgets by 10%. That doesn't work because it doesn't differentiate between the strategic and non-strategic spending. And what I mean by that is, for example, Walmart is a good example. They make sure that all their employees can afford a debt-free education. So it's their competitive advantage. Another example from my customers is one of them offers $10,000 after 5 years for being with a company, and after 10 years, it's $20,000. So that's a strategic investment in the people. That's something you wouldn't want to cut. A strategic investment is also investing into the customer experience, for example. So being really clear what's strategic, what helps me to achieve our goals, what's non-strategic, and the non-strategic, obviously, that's the one you can cut. R&D investments, especially if your game is in the product leadership, you want to continue because you come out stronger at the other end. The fourth bullet here is an interesting concept because we can, and we usually overestimate the importance of the price on our customers. And if we look at all the prices out there, or all the products and services are either underpriced or they're overpriced. And if they're overpriced, you probably have to put a lot of effort into sales and marketing. So a strategy here can actually be to lower the prices, but by all means also lower the marketing and sales expenses. And it might happen that the company can become more profitable. And if you're underpriced, it's the opportunity to have a fair price in the future and communicate that to the market that you're actually moving up a tier in the market. And finally, the price depends on your industry, but sometimes it can be less relevant than actual availability, which is quite true for New Zealand if you think of things like Chipboard in the last 12 months. So one thing to keep in mind is there's actually no such thing as business expenses. Everything is an investment and each investment has an ROI. So having people and employing people, that's an investment because we want to have a certain productivity and a certain benefit by employing people. Otherwise, there's no point really. So understanding what sort of expenses do we have and is this a good investment? So if we look at our P&L and everything we do and everything we spend, is this an investment that actually makes sense? So having a look can make sense. So Darren, sorry to say, but there's time for the CFO to spend a bit of extra hours. So what do we want to do here? So first of all, we want to have full cost visibility. And cost visibility means what's the cost per unit, what's the cost per function, per business unit, per customer, per business process, etc. We want to really understand where's money spent and who's spending it. And once that's clear, we can make the right decisions. The cash flow forecasting helps us to understand what are the different scenarios here, what's happening and how do we need it to adjust. So what if inflation rises to 10 or 12%? What does it mean for the business? Where do we need to cut costs? So being ready. And I can refer to my colleague Stephen Lynch. He had a great webinar on scenario planning, and that's certainly something we can help with. Reviewing the capital structure and refinancing some of your capital if it's not already too late, but looking for the opportunity, is there a chance of getting some sort of extra lines of credit? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, it can actually make sense during times of inflation to increase your debt. Then there's the option to have a full ABC analysis, and that's not only for your products and services income, it's also for your inventory and for your customers. So what I mean by ABC analysis is usually you make 80% of your revenue with 20% of the customers. And you make these 80% of revenue with usually 20% of your products. So if you look at the warehouse, there's oftentimes lots of products sitting there, ties up cash, and can be a strategic decision to actually let go of some of the product range and focus on the things that actually generates revenue. And the same is true with your customers, because oftentimes you generate most of the revenue with a certain handful of customers, and then there's a longer tail of customers which might be demanding, but it's actually not profitable. So finding the right balance, understanding a strategy, how can I make a B customer into an A customer, and being selective about these C customers. And then there's two other concepts. One is to optimize your cash cycle and your working capital. So there's 7 levers you can pull. I'll talk about that in a minute. And secondly, we need a rigorous KPI management and be clear what are the KPIs and what are the actions, because anytime you've got a KPI sitting in the red, we need to be clear what do we do next to get back into the green. So let me briefly talk about the 7 levers. As managers in a business, we can pull these 7 levers. That's a concept by Alan Mills. He's an Australian accountant, and it's a quite a powerful concept. What we can do is we can influence sales. We know what sort of actions we can take. We can work on our margin, we can influence the overhead expenses, and we can influence our EBIT margin. So these are the 4 things we can manage on the P&L. On the balance sheet, we can manage the payables. So how quickly are we paying? And do we get some sort of rebate if we're paying early? How quickly are we collecting the money? And again, are there any sort of incentives for our customers? And how long is our inventory in days? So if you compare your annual sales with your current inventory levels and multiply it by 365, you have the days of inventory. And if all that you do is looking to improve each number by 1% or by 1 day, the effect on profit and cash will actually surprise you. Because if everything stays the same and you only increase sales by 1%, by increasing the price, obviously it goes straight to the bottom line, and your net profit, if you have a 90%, or let's say a 10% profit margin, obviously rises by 10% from 10 to 11. And that's quite a big effect. So pulling these levers can actually help you moving in the right direction and fight inflation. When we look at the KPIs, what are the relevant numbers we need to look at here? So one crucial one obviously is productivity. Productivity is measured by revenue divided by the number of full-time employees. So are we becoming more productive? Are we generating more and more revenue with, let's say, a stable amount or a slightly growing amount of FTEs? Or are we just keeping ourselves busy internally, but it actually doesn't translate into revenue? Understanding your productivity levels in the past and how they're currently changing, especially during inflation, it's important to understand, and then defining a benchmark and defining the actions, how to move on from here. Team effectiveness, something similar. It's your gross profit divided by the wages and salaries. The Customer satisfaction, you're all familiar with the NPS scores, but it's also something that I've discussed with a client the other day, is to actually capture all the complaints. Do we understand what our customers don't like about us? And do we have actions to improve it? We don't necessarily have to wait for the NPS, but do we have a spreadsheet where we capture those complaints? The employee satisfaction is an important one. So again, the eNPS score or your staff turnover, because it has a direct effect on productivity. Sales conversion ratios, obvious. If you adjust your prices, how does your conversion rate change? If it goes down, what's the direct effect on your funnel and eventually your revenue? So these are numbers we can play around with, and especially if you sell products online, it's easy to influence them fairly quickly. EBIT interest coverage is it's a covenant by the bank usually. So your profit, how often does it cover your current interest expenses? So that's something to keep an eye out, because you don't want to be breaching a covenant. And then there's another concept, which I'll show you in a minute, which is the cash flow margin. And the cash flow margin is made up of a couple of different KPIs. So first of all, we need to understand our working capital. So if this company here generates $7 million in revenue, and in order to generate $7 million in revenue, we need $1 million in inventory, and we're waiting for our cash, which is $800,000. And obviously our creditors will fund us. So there's $400,000 in payables. So my working capital here in this example is $1.4 million. $1.4 million divided by 7 million makes 20%. So that means if I grow the company, if I double the revenue to 14 million and everything stays the same, I need another $1.4 million in working capital. So this is one part. Then we need to understand where's our gross margin. So if my working capital is basically 20% or 20 cents in the dollar, and my gross margin is higher than the working capital, then that's fine, because we continue to grow and we keep on making money. But in times of inflation, if my margin goes down, and some of you said the margin is going down, and the gap gets narrower and narrower, we're getting a problem. Because if the gross margin drops below what you need as working capital, this can become a real risk, and you start burning money, you start burning cash. And although you might be growing and the top line looks nice, there is the phenomenon of growing broke. So that's something to be aware of. So managing the gross margin and the working capital. So we're almost getting to the end. I'll try to speed up. There's an opportunity for sales and marketing. So we can reposition the brand. If we increase or lower the price, this is a communication effort. So we need to do a few changes if we're in a different price bracket. Doubling down on the core competency. So product leadership, customer intimacy, operational excellence. Tell the market, let them know. Make sure you improve the customer experience and focus on marketing that actually works. So you're all familiar with digital marketing. It's probably not the right time to spend money all over the place and try all sorts of different campaigns. Look at the stuff that actually works, double down on it. Invest into the relationships with your customers and be ready for new customer segments, because as you grow into different price areas or brackets, this might attract new customers. And finally, the strategic opportunities in times of inflation are mergers or acquisitions. Valuations have come down in the market due to the rising interest rates. Is there a chance to join forces with a competitor, or is there the chance for vertical integration where you grab the margins of your suppliers or distributors? So this is something to consider. Looking at your supply chains, really understanding not only your primary supplier, but who are their suppliers, and what's the effect if some of the components are crisscrossing across the globe and they can't either get them or just at a much higher price. What's the knock-on effect here? It might mean to actually really establish completely alternate supply chains and not just change a few suppliers here and there. Building an ecosystem that leverages your core competency and double down on your generic strategy. And finally, remember one thing: whatever goes up must come down. So there's already talk about there might be deflation coming in a year's time. We don't know. We need to adjust. I guess that's business. So type in the chat, what's your number one learning from today's webinar? We've come to the end and we'll open the Q&A in a second, but I'd be interested if you heard any ideas, what you could do, potential that's might be uncovered within your organization. What's something you haven't considered so far? Yeah, looking at inflation as an opportunity. Yes, definitely. Raising prices. Darren, you were happy about my about my comment of putting a bit more extra work in. Sorry about that. Doubling down, pulling the 7 levers, monitoring the cash flow ratio. Yes. Systems and processes. Nice. All right. So let's have a quick Zoom poll before we get into the Q&A. Would you like a recording of the webinar, a copy of the slide deck? We actually put together a one-pager for dummies when it comes to inflation. Would you like to have that? And if you're really concerned about your financials, if you want to sit down with us or with Felicity Hill, who I'll introduce in a second, Frank Accounting, if you want to deep dive your financials, we can have a half-day session and look at the things that we can do and uncover some potential. So quickly type it in. Do you want a recording, a copy of my slides, a one-pager, Inflation for Dummies, or even a half-day workshop? And you might have to scroll if you can't see all the answers. Okay, so let's end the poll and jump into the Q&A. So I've got Felicity here with me. She's just in the transition of moving from Greenline to Frank Accounting and is the incoming director. She's a chartered accountant. She sits on the board of several companies, is a member of the Institute of Directors. And one thing she's really passionate about is using the latest technologies to drive business decisions. So any sort of questions with that regards, she's definitely an expert to make things visible and make sure you use all the data that you've got and make the right decisions. So any sort of questions you may have, please type it in the Q&A at the bottom. You should see this possibility. Any questions, feel free to ask. If there's no questions, that's great. Then I've probably answered most of them. So we'll give it a minute.
Got one from Stephen there, Yuli,
Yeah.
and asking what trends I'm seeing in my client portfolio. We are seeing cash tightening, whether that's better days extending, it's making it harder to get funding from the bank. So we are seeing trends of cash tightening. We're also seeing gross margins, as you would imagine, for the most part, tightening again. Often that's a reflection of costs going up and not increasing the top line by a similar amount. So that squeeze is coming in if people aren't monitoring it. And the other one there is services to be asking what you should be asking your accountant for. You should be having some sort of forecast, whether you've got internal capability to do that or whether that's your external accountant. But you should be forecasting, and not just on one scenario, but on several scenarios. Having a path ahead, it gives us visibility. Obviously, no one's got a crystal ball, but having visibility of where you're going and what that might look like, enabling you to pull those levers as and when you see roadblocks or issues coming up within those forecasts. So forecasting, monthly reporting, it's having some formal structure around that monthly reporting is really, really important. It enables you to see trends. It enables you to see how things are tracking, which in this environment, we've had quite a period of sunshine, I would say, and it's sort of a bit, people have made hay while the sun has shone. Who knows whether we'll actually enter a full recession, but I think having controls and having reporting around there, making sure that if things do head south, then we know immediately. We've got levers to pull, we've got scenarios, and also having a risk plan in place there. So knowing what your steps are if things head south. Having a plan does help people sleep a lot better at night.
Thanks, Felicity. There's another question from Carl, and that might be down your alley as well. For SMEs, any suggestions on how to quickly and accurately access data to look at effects of actions like raising or lowering prices when the data sample over a short period can be relatively small?
There is software out there. It's reasonably expensive. Some of the software that we've got sort of upwards $2,000. So if you're doing it on a short term, the first thing I would do is ask your accountant if they have the software, and they can run those scenarios pretty quickly for you. So that's probably my first point of call, because we do have subscriptions and pay for things, and you'll get a fraction of the cost probably than doing the whole thing yourself. So I would be talking to your accountant and being able to access some of the software that they've got. Otherwise, a simple Excel spreadsheet and looking at how that might work. But Yuli, you might have some other ideas.
Yeah, Carl, I guess it depends also. If you sell your products online, then obviously you've got all the data available, and just like asking the accountant, there's a lot of really great agencies, and the agencies, they all work with all sorts of tools in the background, and getting access to these tools and getting the data inside can be another strategy rather than trying to find everything yourself. And if you're a service provider, then talking to your clients and see what sort of feedback are you getting. So if you do things like an NPS study, so is that changing? Are you seeing some sort of unhappiness with your customers? Getting that direct feedback really is probably crucial to stay in touch.
Yeah, I mean, obviously service provider as well. We had the conversation in that our costs were rising. We needed to keep the best talent to enable us to deliver the best services that we do. And therefore, we did need to look at raising our prices. We know the ins and outs of people's financial situation, so it actually feels a lot harder when you know everything that's going on in their business, and sometimes you feel a little bit guilty. But at the end of the day, you do need to put a value on your service and back yourselves. I went through an exercise of increasing our fees for our annual fees for all of our clients in the last year, and I didn't get a single pushback. So often the perception is with us, particularly in this environment, it's actually a whole lot more acceptable. But I'd be talking to people and also looking at what those effects are, running it with that Power of One type software.
Thanks, Felicity. So we don't have any more open questions at this point. Looks like I've gone over time anyway, so I guess everyone wants to go back to their desks. So thank you very much for participating. We'll send out the information, we'll be in touch, and whatever you've answered in the poll, if you want the recording or the slide deck or the one-pager, we'll send it through as fast as possible. Thanks for attending. And we have another webinar coming up, which is my colleague Logan, and he will look at the business development opportunities in uncertain times. So it's a sales focused webinar. So this is certainly some good insight there, and hope we'll see most of you back in a month's time. Enjoy your afternoon, and thanks for participating. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.